what better way to kick off 2021 than to look through my new Bible system that I've set up for this year. Let's dive in. So over the last year, I've been improving, developing and adapting my Bible study system and note-taking system based on my studies and some videos that I've been watching from other people, trying to get a system that works for me. And now I feel like I've, for the most part, got that system nailed down. And that's what we're going to look at today, how I'm doing my studies this year, how I'm writing my Bible and stuff like this. Now, a couple of caveats before we begin. This video is not going to look at why I write in my Bible. I'll look at that in a different video. And it's also not going to look at exactly what I write in my Bible. Again, that's going to be in another later video. Instead, this is the tools and the kind of whole big system that I've developed of how I take notes and then how I have them in my system so I can remember them, find them later on. So I hope that's going to be useful for you. Now, there are two parts to the system. There's the analog and digital. I try and really make the most of each aspect. So I try and seize the advantage of the analog tools, but also seize the advantage of the digital tools. What are they best at for each aspect? And so as we go through the system, I'll explain how I'm using these and how I'm trying to leverage those advantages. So let's kick it off with analog. Now, you've probably seen my earlier review of the NET Journal Edition Bible, and this is still my main paper Bible that I've been using. It's great for study because there are no distractions, unlike a Bible app when you wake up first thing in the morning. And also it's got a space to add notes, and the paper's a bit thicker, so that helps you for writing notes down. So this is where my notes start. I'll read and then I'll put something in the margin. Now, as for what I'm reading, I'm using Jason Mayfield's Tear Up Your Bible 2.0 reading plan and working through that this year. But, you know, I'm not fixed to reading plans and I may go off it later on. What I really like about reading plans, especially Jason's one, is that it's a good way to go through lots of parts of the Bible that you might not go through otherwise. That's really good for exposing you for what, you know, a message that God perhaps wants to tell you rather than the message that you want to read. So that's where I start. Now, when it comes to actually taking the notes, I've changed my system based on how I've discovered using the Bible. Now, my handwriting is a bit larger than some other people. And I find that even with these journal Bibles, which have, you know, wider margins and stuff, there just really isn't enough space for me to put down the sort of notes that I want to do. So I've started using the same system that Matthew Everhard uses, which is based on Jonathan Edwards' Miscellanies. Now, link here that you can check out as well. So what that means is I'll put a note in the margin of the Bible, and that will link to a note in a notebook, in this case a Leutram notebook. And I have an index which has a list of all of those notes, and it's using a basic number system, 1, 2, 3, whatever. So then I can go back and find that note later on. The advantage of using this system is I can write a really long, full note, or I can incorporate things from commentaries or something else in this note, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in the Bible. So if I want to go into real depth about one verse, that's no problem. So as for the pens I'm using this set of Bible micro pens, which I got from my wife. It's a brand new set, so I haven't really fully put them through their paces, but this is a style of pen that I like. It's small, it's thin, I can add notes in margins, there's different colors, so I can go through it. I'll have a full review of those pens coming soon. Now, there are some parts of my analog system that I'm looking to change. For example, the NET Journal Bible. I've come to the conclusion that this just isn't really the right version for me. While I really love the leather cover and the style of paper is quite nice, there are a couple of aspects which I don't really like. One is the translation. It's a nice translation, but it's more dynamic than I'd like. To be honest, I think it's really good for a dynamic translation. I really like the approach that they've done. And I think the online version is really great, where you have all those detailed notes and explanations for their choices. But I'm doing more studies when it comes to looking at the original languages. And so for that purpose, I think I want to move back to a more formal translation. So I'm looking at getting an NASB or perhaps the ESV version. The other aspect is the margins, which in this version, you have lines down them. Again, this actually has not been exactly the right thing for me, because the lines are a bit too restrictive in what you can do there. So I'm going to go and find a wide margin for Bible, which is in one of those translations. I haven't chosen the exact one yet, but I still think it was a really good choice to get this. It's a good translation, especially to have a different perspective and shape things up, but it's not the perfect one for me. And by getting this one, which is cheaper than some of them, it has revealed what I didn't know about journal Bibles and what I actually want in a journal Bible. The only other aspect of my analog system, which I'm still kind of finalizing, ironing out, is my color code system. I've tried a few different things, and it always feels a bit strange to select a color code. Which themes are the most important that I should be looking for? So I'm still finalizing that. I have some things in place, but that's why I'm not really going into depth with that right now. The whole purpose of the analog side of my system is to have the minimized distractions and also the tactile sensation, which helps to increase retention in memory later on. But there are some downsides of an analog system. It's harder to recall when you're relying on your own memory. And you don't have deep search functionality that you can get in some of these digital tools. Also, if you like reminders and stuff like that, then those can be very useful. So basically for me, analog is how I start my study. Analog is how I look at the text to avoid distractions and to go deeper, to have like focused time. And then I move things into my digital system, which is useful for helping to find things later on if I need to look them up, and is also useful for drawing connections and seeing all the notes all together. So that's the next part of the system. Let's head over and check out my digital side. So after using the analog system, it's time to move over to digital. Now, the reason for using a digital system for me is that it provides a better way for searching and categorizing information later on, being able to come back and find those notes and draw connections between them. Whereas using like an analog notebook, that means I have to reference it, I have to store it somewhere, I have to then try and find that. A digital system, I can do a simple search in the search bar, perhaps find it there, or find something I didn't expect to find from that as well. Or I can have links between my other notes that will become apparent in this review when I go through it there. And the other side of it is also helping to turn that collection of notes into something that is produced later on. When you have it already down in text, it's much more easy to copy, paste it somewhere, or reference that in another place. So that's why I have the digital part of my system. Now, in the past, I've used a note-taking application called Notion, and while I still like Notion, I've actually moved on from using it, and I'm now using a tool called Obsidian. And the reason for that is two parts. One, Obsidian is based on plain text, and that is a much more future-proof note system, much more future-proof database, because it's so universal and available elsewhere. It's the most basic file format pretty much, and so even if I move over to a different note-taking application, I'll be able to import all my notes into that new system. And the other reason is because of the way that it is structured, that it uses this linking between notes, which I've done a video on in Notion, but it's much more integrated into the idea of Obsidian, and you have the knowledge graph connected to that. So that's why I'm using Obsidian. Now there are Windows and there are also a Mac version of this app. I believe there's even Linux. There is no mobile application version, but I'll cover that later. So let's dive in and take a look. So here I have Isaiah chapter 7, which is a text that I've been looking at and studying. And here we've just got an example. And if you look in verse 3 here, I've made a little note here that you can see. Ahaz prepares for a siege. And so if I click it, this will take me to my note that I created on the text. And so it says, meeting by the washer's field or fuller's field is perhaps a sign that King Ahaz was preparing for a siege and checking on the water supply. And as you can see, there's also a link here going back to Isaiah chapter 7. So you can click between them and go there. Now I've also got a note on King Ahaz. I have some extra information that we have here. We know that King Ahaz was a bad king. In 2 Kings 16 it says that he forced his son to walk through fire, which is probably synonym for a child sacrifice. And 2 Chronicles 28 it probably says that he was a Baal worshipper. It says that he was a Baal worshipper, but it doesn't probably say it. It does say that. And so actually what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create another link. I'm just going to highlight Baal. So now if I click that, it will create a note on Baal, like the Canaanite god. And so I can add information there regarding Baal or Baal worship. I can also, because I've got linked mentions, I can go back to my note on Ahaz preparing the siege. Now, yeah, there's no mention about King Ahaz here and that he was probably preparing for a siege. So let's just add some information here. When there was the threat of the Syro-Ephraim invasion in Isaiah 07, King Ahaz checks, probably checks, actually let's change this. Let's make the note, King Ahaz, what was it? Prepares for a siege? Why aren't you there? Ahaz. That's why, because I called it Ahaz. King Ahaz prepares for a siege. Okay. And actually, by checking on the water supplies, this shows King trusting in natural resources, not and that Isaiah has to ambush the king. Suggests he was avoiding Isaiah and by extension Yahweh. Just correct the spelling mistake there. So there we go. So there's my note. Got Syro-Ephraim invasion. We may want to add, I could turn this one into an extra note. I could add some more information there, more cultural background there. So I've expanded my information that I have about the king. And let's now show more in context. Let's now go into, I can see more options like open the local graph. So I can see King Ahaz. I've got links to the various ideas connected to him. The note that he was preparing for a siege, chapter in Isaiah 7 about him, and more. And so as I extend this, as I build up, I can then start, if I start writing about someone else who worship Baal, I will have connections between different Baal worshippers and we can see if there's any commonalities there. Now, one of the limitations that I have with this system at the moment is it's very much desktop based. It doesn't work on the iPad or the iPhone. There's no Obsidian app there. Unlike something like Roam Research, which also has the same way of connecting notes together and showing the knowledge graph. There is a way that I can get notes into the system though, and that's actually the main way that I send my notes over here. And that's using my phone and using the application called Drafts. Now, the thing about this application is it allows me to export a note that I create in plain text. And that's all that I really need to do with it. There are many other applications that also work in the same way, but I like Drafts because it gives me access to other actions that I can do on text as well if I want to send it somewhere else. So although I can't really access my notes, I can't really see these connections, I can still make notes, I can still edit notes. I actually tend to use IA Writer for editing notes because once I've exported into my Obsidian database, then I can't really edit from Drafts. So the good thing about that is I can have my Bible, I can have the phone or the iPad next to me while I'm creating these notes. While I'm studying, turn over, create a note quickly, send it and save it so that it's saved for good. So there you have it, my new Bible reading system for 2021. Now, again, there actually are a couple of little aspects that I've left out for good reasons. One is how I use my iPad for taking notes, and that's because I'm actually recording this video on my iPad, and also because it tends to something I tend to use when I'm preparing for a sermon or for class on a passage. So I'll look at that in a different video. And the other aspect is using Logos Bible software, which I find really helpful and really useful. And again, that's because I tend to use it for studies, for sermons, and not for necessarily when I'm just sitting down in the morning for my daily devotional. But even still, with both of those applications, eventually those are going to come into my Obsidian system of notes, so everything comes into the same central bucket. I think that's a really important thing to know about the system. Like, I'm getting kind of two central buckets. One is the paper one, and the other one is the digital one. And you know, paper can actually outlast digits because formats change over time. You're not guaranteed that a note that you made in Notion will be accessible in the future. Notion could go out of business, who knows, or Evernote, similar situation. Plain text helps with that, but files can become corrupt as well. Whereas paper can actually last surprisingly well. Just look at Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, we still have those around. Now, if you are just getting started in a Bible note-taking system or reading the Bible for the first time, don't worry if you don't have a system like this. This has taken me a while to develop my own system where I'm covering everything. And even still, there are aspects which aren't quite right and that I know that I need to or want to adjust in the future. The important thing is that I started and I learned what worked for me, what didn't work for me, and then I evolved my system over time. And I think that's a really important thing for you. The most important thing you can do is just get started. Just start reading. And then after that, you can look to start taking notes and work out your way to do that. And then after that, maybe you can add in some digital aspect where you're saving notes in the long term, or paper and digital at the same time. I hope this video has been useful for you. I'm really looking forward to sharing other aspects about how I use this system. And so subscribe if you want to find out why I write in my Bible and what exactly I'm taking notes on in my Bible. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.